All right, we're here. This is it, ground zero. Let's talk about Justice League. Justice League is finally here. It's the 5th movie in the DC Extended Universe and the very first live-action Justice League movie made. This movie takes place sometime after the events of Batman vs. Superman, where Superman's killed, and Bruce Wayne / Batman and Diana Prince / Wonder Woman try to recruit more heroes for this team to combat this enemy known as Steppenwolf, who wants to collect these 3 powerful mother boxes to take over the world, I guess? I mean, it's not quite sure what he wants to do, but that's pretty much it. Joining Batman and Wonder Woman, we have The Flash, we have Aquaman, and we have Cyborg. And these people who have never met each other, don't really know that much about each other, have to band together to try to stop Steppenwolf and save the world. Because as the tagline said, you can't save the world alone. Now, I think everyone has been looking forward to a Justice League movie ever since people started making superhero movies. I think the idea of a live-action Justice League movie was taken a lot more serious once Marvel set into motion their plans to do an Avengers movie. But I have not been on board completely with what DC and Warner Brothers have been doing to go forward with Justice League. Man of Steel was pretty mediocre. Batman vs. Superman attempted to be a Justice League prequel, but just had too much shit going on, emphasis on shit. Suicide Squad was totally pointless. I don't even know why that movie exists. And then Wonder Woman was fantastic. I absolutely love Wonder Woman. So with Wonder Woman being as great as it was, I had a little more faith in the future of the DCEU, but this was still Zack Snyder, even though he did leave post-production and Joss Whedon had to pretty much finish the work due to tragic family matters that Snyder had to deal with. I was still skeptical because I despise Batman vs. Superman. I was really nervous how this would be. And in the long run, Justice League is pretty good. That's it. It's not great, but it's pretty entertaining. I'm going to delve into the positives first before I get into the negatives, because on the whole, I did enjoy this movie and I liked it. What I really like about this movie is what they do with the new characters and the overall team together. The new characters here are Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg, who I have said many times, these characters are not well known to the mainstream. Even though there's a Flash TV show on the CW, TV audiences and movie audiences are actually quite different. So you need to make a standalone movie to introduce these unknown characters to the audience. Unfortunately, because they really wanted to rush a Justice League movie, since Marvel did 2 Avengers movies, they didn't have time to make a Cyborg, Aquaman, or Flash movie. But you actually do get to know quite a bit about these new characters. They get about as much character development as Hawkeye did in the first Avengers. I mean, nobody's under mind control by the villain, thank God. But what I mean is that these characters are fully introduced in the big team-up movie, and you don't get a whole lot of character development, but you get just enough to where you get a sense of personality with all these characters, and you end up liking them. The big show stealer for me was Ezra Miller as Barry Allen, who is finally sporting a better haircut than he did in Fantastic Beasts. But he's the comic relief of the movie, and he's exactly how I imagined the Flash would be whenever I think of the Flash, because my ideal Flash comes from the Justice League animated series, where he was always the comic relief, and it worked, and Ezra Miller does work here at points. And I just love the idea that he's so wide-eyed and childlike, in a good way, when he's around all these heroes that have godlike abilities, that can stay underwater, that are half machine, or that are rich as shit. So he really did a lot for me. And one of the characters that I was absolutely not looking forward to at all was Aqua Bro, played by Jason Momoa, because I just felt like they were trying too hard to make him cool in the trailers, like making him buffed up, tattooed, long hair. He says a bunch of surfer quotes like, "I dig it," or I don't know, I just didn't like the approach just watching it through the trailers. But he actually proves to be a very capable character and not just like the surfer dude who's mellow, laid back, because he can be really tough and take authority when he has to. If there was one character that I felt like they needed a little more time with, especially when it came to his backstory, it would be Cyborg, because Cyborg is the one that goes through a more tragic backstory and needs to be explained in a little more detail, especially since he's not that well known to mainstream audiences. But Ray Fisher not only does a really good job, but again, you still get to know enough about him to get a sense of personality and what he's going through. I just wish there was a little more. And then of course Gal Gadot is fantastic as Wonder Woman. Ben Affleck is really good as Bruce Wayne / Batman. I've read some reviews, some negative reviews about Justice League where they said, oh, Ben Affleck gives another dour performance as Batman. And I'm like, you do understand that Batman is not supposed to be a super lighthearted character. I mean, he's definitely more optimistic and more upbeat in terms of personality than in Batman vs. Superman, where he was just a fucking murderous psychopath. But Ben Affleck is very good in the role, and it just makes me sad to hear all of these reports that he's trying to look for an exit to leave the role of Batman, because he's pretty good. The big highlights of the movie are the action scenes and just moments when all these team members are interacting with each other, because there's great camaraderie between each of the team members. You really get a sense of personality between all of them, and seeing them utilize all their powers in certain situations or even to help each other is neat as well. The action scenes are a lot of fun to watch, even if they can be very CG heavy. And once again, the CGI in this movie, you know what? Let me break it down into segments. Watching all the trailers, I was annoyed that it was looking like a completely CGI world, and the CGI backdrops actually didn't bug me as much as I thought they would. It would have been nice to have some realistic locations, but it wasn't that big of an issue compared to the trailers. But there is a handful of terrible CGI here and there, and this is still something that Warner Brothers and DC need to fix, because as much as I love Wonder Woman, that finale had terrible CGI, and this movie is just no exception. Now let's get into the bad. Since Warner Brothers and DC were rushing this movie just to get out there and try to catch up with Marvel, since they have 2 Avengers movies, the first half of this movie feels very rushed, and a lot of it is dedicated to setting up the second half of the movie. So there's a lot of exposition, just a lot of setup on who Steppenwolf is, what exactly the mother boxes were, because BVS was just so vague and cryptic on what exactly the details were. I mean, I completely understand that they had to do it just to kind of have us know what's going on and who Steppenwolf is, what the mother boxes are capable of. But this also proves my point on why they shouldn't have rushed this movie, and on top of that, why this is so short. I mean, I will say this, the pacing of the movie is very quick and smooth. There's never a point where I was bored throughout the movie. At the same time, as much as I've complained about Batman vs. Superman being 2.5 hours, this needed to be 2.5 hours. And I feel like this movie would have benefited from being 2.5 hours. You would not have felt the length, because when you look at the first Avengers, that one's 2.5 hours. But at a point when I thought I was 25 minutes into the movie, I was an hour into the movie, I'm like, wow, that moved quick. So I just feel like if this movie had been 2.5 hours long, we could have spent a little more time with the newer characters, and we would have gotten a little more of the things that we actually really liked. And knowing that DC has released an extended cut of both BVS and Suicide Squad, this is an extended cut that I want to see. I really want to see more. Now let's get into the villain of the movie, Steppenwolf. Like I said in my review for Wonder Woman, DC has as much of a villain problem as Marvel does, probably worse, just based on how bad they screwed up the Joker and Lex Luthor. But with Steppenwolf, he's pretty much like Malekith in Thor the Dark World or Ares in Wonder Woman, where there's nothing like crazy offensive about him, or even offensive in general. It's just he's boring. He's a stock villain. He's a MacGuffin just to get the heroes together to fight a villain. And the dialogue for him is just so cliched. It's probably some of the most cliched villain lines you could possibly think of. And also, he looks like a video game character. A lot of people have said this, but it just doesn't feel organic when you look at all these heroes who feel very real, even with Cyborg being very CG heavy. I got into his character that I didn't mind the fact that he was CG, but with Steppenwolf, it was just too much, and he also comes out of nowhere. Unless you watch the Ultimate Cut of BVS, you have no idea who Steppenwolf is, which, again, I guess that explains why they had to have the first half of the movie be committed to backstory and setup. but I just didn't think this worked as a villain. So to wrap things up, I don't dislike this movie at all. I had fun with it, and this movie, in terms of the villain heroes thing, it's very much like a standard Marvel movie, where the villain is just not that good or interesting, but they get the heroes down, so I can give them a pass for that, just like I do with the Marvel movies. So on the whole, it's good, but it's definitely not great. They really should have taken their time to set up this movie. We should have had a Flash, Aquaman, Cyborg movie beforehand. We should not have had BVS. We should not have had Suicide Squad. At the very least, instead of those two movies, we should have had a second Superman and a solo Batman movie that skips the origin completely. So if there's any disappointment to be had, it's that they didn't really build up to this movie the way Marvel did with the Avengers. But by itself, it's very entertaining. It's lots of fun. Those who hated Batman vs. Superman like myself, I think you might enjoy this one. It's nothing spectacular, and of all the superhero movies this year, this is probably the weakest of the bunch, but hey, at least there wasn't a bad superhero movie this year, I'll say that. So, good but not great. I will see this again, but I really won't be super excited to see it again like I was with Wonder Woman. And that's my review for Justice League. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. I will be doing a spoiler review because obviously we all know Superman is in the movie. I haven't talked about him at all, and I need to talk about Superman, so look for my spoiler review sometime this weekend or next week. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.